I'm here with Mark Stouse, CEO of Proof Analytics. Hi, Mark. How are you?
How are you? Great to
I'm
see you
good.
again.
Great to see you too. I thought we would start the conversation today with a couple of definitions because not all marketers use some of these terms. Let's start with marketing mix modeling. What is this? What type of marketers and businesses is this applicable for? And how big does my marketing budget need to be before I even think about doing marketing mix modeling?
That's great. That's a really great question. So, marketing mix modeling was first introduced in any kind of organized way by Procter and Gamble. I don't know, 35 years ago or so. It is, another word for it at that time was applied econometrics, which, of course, most marketers didn't really have a strong affinity for that nomenclature. Um, what it is you take multivariable regression math, which is the fundamental algorithms that underlie the scientific method of inquiry, right? So 80% or so of the world's questions are typically answered to some degree by regression. Regression is designed to take all kinds of input data. So this usually refers to things that might be causing something to happen. And you compare that with data that represents an outcome, and it organizes and analyzes the history on it, shows you kind of a stack rank of what was the most powerful thing that influenced this outcome, all the way down to the least powerful. It gives you a sense of time lag, a computed time lag for each one of those. So in marketing terms, this is the idea that when you spend the money on a campaign, you do not get an instantaneous impact, or you're not generating value instantaneously. In many cases, the different investments take months to mature, and there's a whole arc of value that is created there. And if you were to say, well, I'm just going to make this easy and I'm going to kind of focus on the value that I can see in the next quarter, you would typically be walking away from about 90% of the total value that investment created across time. So all of this said, MMM, that's the shorthand for it today, right, is typically used in the Fortune 100, particularly in B2C. But the main reason for that limitation historically has been a very, very high cost associated with implementing marketing mix modeling. That has completely changed in the last several years. It's now available on an automated or nearly automated basis in software for, $49 a seat per month kind of stuff. I mean, so you can implement, it used to be that, you had to, like, last time I did it as a CMO, the old legacy way, which is a huge team of data scientists, was at Honeywell Aerospace. And my marketing budget annually was, north of 150 million. And so you kind of, had, and it was, the analytics were costing me about 6 or 7 million a year. There's not a lot of companies, there's not a lot of marketing teams that can afford to do that, or even if they can afford it, are willing to do that. It was tremendously successful, but it was, it was not scalable, right? And so putting it into software and automating the living heck out of it took it into a very different place. And so today, I would say if you're spending $1 million a year on marketing, you can have 1 or 2 seats and be just great with it. And obviously, it scales up from there. And a lot of the data management side also. I mean, one of the things that we did is we took MRM, which is marketing resource management, which is essentially a system of record for marketers, like any ERP that exists for finance or IT or whatever. And we streamlined and really modernized MRM and among other things, made it an appropriately sized and scaled data management platform for marketers so that they can get to value a lot faster than having to deal with, something really massive and horizontal like Snowflake. And Snowflake is great. I'm not knocking Snowflake, but Snowflake is a heavy lift, and every data lake, every data lakehouse, every data mesh, all that kind of stuff is a company-wide effort, and it is a killer to implement. It is very complex. And so if you want to get to value faster, you have to organize your tools accordingly, and that's where the whole market is going right now.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I want
That's
to
a
dive
long
deeper into
answer,
this.
but it's not a simple answer, so forgive me for that.
Well, I have about 5 follow-up questions. My
Sure.
my first one is like, let's take the Fortune 100 example. Let's think of either an insurance company or like a telecommunications company, and I sponsor a college football game. I advertise on the NFL. I have a bunch of digital marketing that I do. I might have radio marketing. I have in-store sales channels. I do performance marketing, and then I do one of these studies. What's the output of the study at a high
Yeah, so
level
the output
that can help me
going to
make a better
be is
decision?
going to show you how each one of those investments contributed or didn't contribute, as the case may be, to the outcome that you are modeling, right? So it could be more revenue, more profits, faster deal time, right? It could be all kinds of things, right? But you want to understand, how effective was that investment, number one? How quickly did it pay off, number two? And number three is, next to everything else that I could have spent money on, was that a good investment, right? Is that the best way to spend my money? Number four has to do with things that you don't control, right? How important is the economy, interest rates, um, relative consumer confidence, your competitors' actions? It could be almost anything that's relevant to your business. But these are headwinds or tailwinds over which you have no control, but that exert tremendous impact on the performance of your investments, right? And so, for example, if we look at what our customers have seen over 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022 year to date, there is no past as prologue anymore. You cannot say, well, this is what worked or what we think worked last year, so we're going to just do more of that next year. If you were to have done that, even from 2020 to 2021, which I think a lot of people feel were sort of similar years,
Hmm.
you would have been substantially wrong in terms of the way that you spent your money. And this is not about the insufficiency of people per se. There's just a lot of research out there that shows that the unaided human brain can't deal with more than 3 or 4 variables, particularly if one of them is substantially time lagged. And in this case, all of them are time lagged. So that's the main issue here. And so how do I constantly, if you think about it like a GPS on your phone, right? That's maybe the easiest analogy to use. It's tracking you going from A to B, okay? And it's also keeping track of all these environmental factors around you, most of which you cannot see unless it's right in front of you. So it's saying all of a sudden, hey, John, guess what? This route that we served up to you. It was the best route, and you're going to be at the restaurant on time. But there was an accident up ahead, and now there's tons of traffic. And if you stay here, you're going to be 30 minutes late. But if we reroute you and you go left, right, left, right, left, right, you'll only be 5 minutes late, right, and you'll still get there. And that's really the essence of MMM today, is not just a historical ROI view, which it totally gives you, but the ability to navigate your way through a lot of change that's typically, well, right now anyway, very fast and very volatile.
So I totally buy that. By the way, I can't keep more than two variables in my brain at the same time. But I, as a Fortune 100
Yeah.
CMO, if I was Fortune 100 CMO, I'm sold. I'm spending billions of dollars on marketing, and this helps me inform how to move the ship, how to make tactical decisions in a quarter, how to really optimize my budget. And I save a lot of money on channels that aren't working, and also can improve my ROI. Now let's go to the $1 million example where I'm in B2B. I can use my own situation. We sponsor events. We do advertising on LinkedIn, on paid search. We do PR and comms activity. We have our website. We do a podcast, and let's say my budget's $1 million. What can I, and I really want to invest in this. What should I expect my outcome to be, or what should I hope my outcome should be, either in terms of saving money, in terms of allocating my dollars differently, and maybe not having to hire someone, or investing.
So small companies with small budgets, their number one risk is bad investments, right? Cash flow impact of bad investments. Because if you make an investment with very limited cash resources on hand, and it turns out to be the bad choice, you're a two-time loser, because you lost the money on the bet that you made, and you lost the bet you could have made but didn't, right? So this is actually one of the main reasons why it was so important to not only automate this and make it so that it was operationally relevant for anybody, but
Mm-hmm.
to price it accordingly, right? So I would say that in your case, right, the feedback loop is the length of your feedback loop is your number one problem. And this, by the way, is true for the Fortune 100 CMO as well, right? So you can make an investment and you won't know. It won't be perceivable to you one way or the other, right? Whether it was a successful investment for months, sometimes. Sometimes you won't even be able to ever feel it at all, except anecdotally. Not too long ago, I suddenly got this message on LinkedIn from this guy who turned out to be a huge new partner for Proof. His company did. And he saw me on a video of a presentation that I made at this event, a marketing event. It was like 5 years ago.
Oh wow.
I didn't even know that this video was even out there, right? Um, Now, that's an anecdote. That's a one-off, okay? And as it happens, it could turn into a lot of business, right? But it could just as easily have meant nothing. And to us, to this point, it had seemed to have meant so little that we didn't even remember it anymore, right? So this is where you have to say, you know what, my perceptions of reality are suspect. And I need some help looking at this mathematically, because this problem that we're talking about right here is no different than climate change study, epidemiology, or a host of other scientific pursuits, right? It's the same thing. It's just a different subject matter. The math is actually identical, right? You could use proof to look at climate change, to study climate change. It's
Mm.
that agnostic from a math point of view, right? So That's my answer, right? Is that you would at the low dollar end in terms of marketing spend, right? You'd be using it to make sure that not only are you optimized in the face of whatever is happening in the marketplace, but that you're avoiding doubling down on bad investments or inadequate investments for your business, at least, right? You don't want to do that, and a lot of times you're not going to be able to intuit that. In fact, almost all the time you won't be able to.
Mark, you brought up epidemiology, and on social media, I think 99% of folks believe they are epidemiologists. But just to just to kind of lighten it up a little bit, you and I have something in common, which I think we're both political science majors
Mm-hmm.
in
Yeah.
college. I went into analytics. You are running an analytics company, but for many folks, the study of climate change or epidemiology or advertising or econometrics is like, my brain becomes
Yeah, it's
fuzzy.
Greek.
So how do you create an output that a marketer can understand and take action on?
Okay, that is awesome, because I think that actually is one of the core issues facing data science in general with all,
Me too.
right? So, and the best way to illustrate this, without being, overly promotional or anything like that, is the way we approached it in our product. So there are 2 points of entry into proof. One is for analysts, and it gives analysts exactly what they expect to see. It just has made it a lot better, faster, cheaper, whatever, right, for them to operate and to do the models. Um, and if you're a normal business person, whether a marketer or whatever you are, the odds are almost 100% that you will never see that part of proof, because you wouldn't even know how to turn it on, right? That's really what it comes down to. Um, the other side is the business user side, which would include marketers. And this is where the UI becomes, or the UX becomes, really super important, because a lot of those, to your point, a lot of people, if you flash, graphs in particular, in front of them, they just psychologically shut down. They don't like that. At some level, somewhere in high school or college, it made them feel stupid or inadequate or whatever, and they just have a visceral response to it. And a otherwise really, really smart person will just say, well, I don't understand the graph, right? So we realized, so we had a customer, this is about 3 or 4 years ago. We had a retail customer who was driving a lot of data and through a lot of models on a fairly high velocity because of the nature of their business. And so we saw a lot of an unusual amount, an unusual frequency of recalculation in the models. And the graph um, that a normal regression equation generates, which is history, then forecast, right? And then it updates the forecast as the future becomes the present. It started operating like a GPS. I mean, it was rather extraordinary. And that's where that analogy first occurred to us. And then we said, you know what? That's actually really what people need. That's what they want. Whether they have put it into those words yet or not is not really relevant. They're not looking for a historical ROI analysis. They're looking for a way to make a better forward-looking decision, right? Because they want to reduce their risk of being wrong. So what does a GPS on your phone do? It makes it almost impossible for you to not arrive at your destination. I had a CMO a couple weeks ago say, you know what? What I love about this is that I'm never wrong anymore. And I had to kind of think about that for a second, right? Because there was something about that statement that you kind of viscerally want to disagree with. But in the same way that people like the GPS on their phone because it always gets them there and they're never wrong. They don't have to stop and ask for
Mm-hmm.
directions. They don't have to try and figure out the map. All that kind of stuff is gone. And that's what proof is. And so we built the UX to emulate a GPS, to look like a GPS in a sense, right? And then also to enable them to war game up to 4 alternative responses to changes. So let's just say, there was a forecast and then, stuff started happening in the economy and all this kind of stuff. And the recalcs every day or week or month, whatever the frequency is, started to show that reality was drifting off the forecasted line. And it was happening largely because of these 3 factors. Well, you want to be able to war game a response. How do I get back on track? Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like, you're again going back to the GPS on your phone. When it reroutes you, it typically gives you several choices, right? And allows you to make that choice, and then it resets the whole thing and you're off. And that's exactly what proof does. So we have extrapolated away from, abstracted away from the end user, all that mathematical complexity and even the way that stuff is illustrated through mainly graphs into something that is a far friendlier experience while still being accurate.
Yeah, I like that. What I'm taking away from it is I have a lot of confidence on my ability to optimize within a channel, within a digital marketing channel. I've got a lot of ways to do that, but I don't can't necessarily easily optimize among channels where they're interacting with each other in a complex way in different parts of the buying funnel. And that's where I like the GPS analogy. I think of things in terms of stoplights. Red, yellow, green. These certain strategies. And what's cool is we've talked a lot about how to take things that are in market and analyze them to decide what you're going to do in the future. But what happens if you want to build a plan from scratch? And I know you have a lot of experience in PR, so maybe we can talk about PR because that's a big question a lot of folks have. Should I invest in press releases? Should I try to get should I try to get written by the New York Times? How should I approach my
Sure.
PR strategy? And is there a way to do that in PR? You could use another marketing function such that you get good data back from your analytics solution as soon as you can.
Yes. So actually, I started in PR before I became a marketer, and I still have a reasonably pronounced bias for comms that is not just like based on my own experience, but is actually based today on what we see from a lot of the analytics, right? So where I would start here is you have to really understand the business that you are a part of and what the challenges of that business are. That is the first thing. What is the business dealing with, grappling with, and what is your role in helping them grapple with those things? And what is necessary for you to understand about those relationships in order to be effective? So you don't start with the functions, you start with the business. So this is you work it back and reverse engineer down into the functions, and then you execute back up the chain, right? So again, this is very much like the scientific method, right? You start with your question, you have a hypothesis as to what the answer to that question probably is. For a marketer or a communicator, this would be probably what you were presently doing, right? I mean, you wouldn't be doing it if you thought that it didn't add value in some way, right? So it is, in very, very practical terms, your current hypothesis. There is a series of models that in regression that you can choose from, depending on kind of what you most want to understand. And then those models, in conjunction with the question and the hypothesis, is going to tell you what data you need in order to arm that model. So it's actually, people who try and start with the data, got to make sure that all my data is perfect before I do anything else. I don't know whether I'm sorry or happy to say this to them, but I'm happy because they listen and it'll free them up a lot. Is you're inverted. You're 180 degrees out of phase, right, with the way things actually work. In fact, you will never know whether you have the data that you need, nor will you have any objective understanding of the quality of your data unless you subject it to analytics. That's just a statement of data science fact. So that's kind of where that's the way I would start this. But the other part to it is going back up to the top of the question. What we see again and again in the analytics is that the determining factor on how you spend your money in the end is related very closely to how much cost and risk the customer believes is in the buy decision. So if you are selling a $5 item that people buy on a whim, one of the reasons why they buy it on a whim is they think it looks cool. And if they get it home and it totally sucks, they've just lost $5, right? So big deal. They're going to take that risk emotionally. It's not a huge leap. But if we're talking about enterprise B2B or very high dollar B2C, that is a completely different situation. And this is why buy decisions end up taking so long to complete. More than 50% of it is nothing more than due diligence and risk mitigation. And those two things are fancy terms for saying they are scared to death that they are going to make the wrong decision. And so they procrastinate it and they seek more and more and more information, right, to try to get comfortable. So in those situations, comms, if you just look at the analytics, right? Communications, so we're talking about mainly PR, but it could also be investor relations. It could be other subdisciplines of comms, are going to play a disproportionately powerful effect in the bottom half of the funnel, because the bottom half of the funnel is where all the trust and confidence issues reside. The top half is all awareness. And while PR, for example, can absolutely deliver good awareness, it is very lumpy and inconsistent because it's not programmatic, right? You don't have control over when those articles pop, right? So you can't just, you can't say, I want an article about proof every day for the next year. That's not real. If you're talking about real earned coverage, whether it's in some sort of data science publication or the New York Times or whatever, you can't organize it like that. It's just fundamentally not the way that PR works. Whereas if you were talking about advertising or any other paid channel, right, you can control that totally. Not only the frequency of it and the consistency of it, but the messages that are sent through those channels. The customer knows this, right? And so they're happy to take all your paid and owned information at the top of the funnel. But then what you see over and over and over again, it's one of the great consistencies of that we see in analytics today, is that these customers disconnect from paid and owned channels about halfway through the process, right? Why is that? It's because paid and owned represents the vendor propaganda. It's the vendor point of view. And why do they disconnect from it? They've learned everything that you have to say about yourself. And now they're going to be checking on how true it all was. And so the risk that they are seeking to mitigate is the vendor more than anything else. Even if there are other risks, by the way, like their own and customer the capabilities of the customer team to actually implement whatever this is and stuff like that, which is a major risk factor, but that one typically takes a second seat to the vendor risk at this time, at least. So that's the big issue, right? And so, I could, if I were selling, a $5 barrette on the, through all kinds of pharmacies and grocery stores, right? I would not invest in PR. It would be just kind of stupid, right? I would invest in highly programmatic mass advertising, right? And drive it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're selling, a really super expensive piece of software that, could easily have a lot of implementation risk, or a new navigation system for a business jet or something like that, you're gonna have to really invest in PR a lot, because pure advertising is not going to get you anywhere.
It strikes me, this idea of creating confidence for the business that you're going to work from. I have a little nugget to share, which was there was a study that came out for high consideration products, which said that you should have a phone number prominently displayed on your website landing page, or wherever. And the reason is not necessarily because you're going to expect to get more phone calls, but it's that it gives confidence to the buyer that there's someone that you can talk to at any time. A really interesting observation, I
Actually,
thought.
I
And
totally agree with that. Right? There's a lot of data that says that when customers see that they have no way to easily connect live with the person, that means that they're going to have a problem.
yeah, we've definitely seen in high consideration purchases, giving consumers or shoppers or B2B buyers choice in how to engage is key. As you were going through the PR example, Mark, I was thinking through all the kinds of data I might want to upload and be analyzed. Can you think through a customer and like what's one of the most interesting pieces of data they've added to the mix for analysis that you were just like, whoa, it's really interesting and creative and actually informed some future buying decision?
I would say the way I'm going to answer that is may come across as somewhat more mundane than maybe you were hoping for, but
Hmm.
most people focus on the the data that they put into their models is all the stuff that they're doing, and they leave out
Mm.
all the stuff that they don't control, particularly their competitors' actions, right? Um,
Interesting.
and what, again, big takeaway from all kinds of analytics is that most of any given situation, you do not control most of the factors, right? Generally speaking, it's a 2/3, 1/3 mix, meaning you control about 1/3 of the factors. And so what it really comes down to is how well are you surfing the wave over which you have no control. You don't control the wave. So you're either surfing it well or you're surfing it poorly in any given moment, right? So one of the biggest things that we talk to customers about is do not forget the external factors that could really speed you up or slow you down.
That's really interesting. I can imagine, like, let's say I'm marketing BMW, and there are, one third of it are my car lineups, the prices, my advertising, brand loyalty, and then you've got the supply chain shortage. You've got
Right.
what is Audi doing. You've got what is Tesla doing. All those things are really important. Super interesting. I can see how getting a good data set on those things can inform the impact of what you're doing.
Well, I mean,
You mentioned
just look at
external.
it real fast. Look at it this way. If the GPS on your phone was just tracking your progress along a route. Okay. Was not aware of all the environmental factors. How useful would that GPS be in the end?
Mm-hmm.
It would be a slightly automated version of a map. That would be it. Abraham Lincoln actually had a great line. It's actually in the movie that came out. Spielberg did, and he's talking to a congressman about being he was, before he was president, he was a surveyor, and he's like, I can tell you that a compass will point you true north, but it has nothing to say about the forests and swamps and other obstacles that you'll have to cross as you move forward, right? And that is the genius of the GPS, and that is what an analytics is going to do for you. It's going to give you that picture not only of what you're doing, but what everything else is happening that might impact what you're doing.
That's a great analogy and a great quote. You mentioned, Mark, external factors, and maybe we can end on this question. There's a lot of talk with the market down and interest rates and everything. Are we entering a recessionary period? And what advice would you give to marketers as they're doing planning and um, and all companies are looking at contingencies for every way that they spend and invest?
So my number one answer for that would be imagine the amount of risk that your customers feel right now. Right. So it's not just about the market downturn, because it might be as bad as 2008. It also might be less bad than 2008, but it's going to be substantially more volatile, and the pace of change is going to be huge. And so what that does to people is it makes them very, very risk averse, and they go to the most conservative scenario possible. And so anything you can do, this is, by the way, not just about messaging and the outbound stuff, right? This is about price, for example. This is about contract terms. This is about anything that you can do to decrease your customer's risk is going to be helpful to them and helpful to you as a result, right? In terms of maintaining revenue flow. So this is where, marketers have to realize, they have to get back to the P's of marketing, right? And they have to realize that one of those is price, right? I mean, you just can't expect people to feel the same about $100,000 SaaS license now versus 2 years ago, right? This is true for investors as well, right? I mean, you're seeing VC money and other kinds of money really drying up right now. It's because the values are so inflated. What people want them to invest their money into, and at the valuations that are currently in place, everyone's going, man, I'm going to lose my ass, right? I'm actually seriously considering selling my house right now, because the valuation is just through the roof, and I can still command that kind of thing in the marketplace. But I probably wouldn't buy back into the market immediately. I'm going to wait until things kind of adjust downwards, and then I'll probably do something, right? So that is the mentality of people today. And if you aren't actively acknowledging that and engaging with them on that basis, nothing else that you do as a marketer, or for that matter, as a company, is going to matter.
Well, Mark, on that note, thanks very much for being on the High EQ Marketer, and great to see you.
Great to see you too. Absolutely. Marketing really is a fusion of of IQ, which would be kind of like the science end of it, the math end of it, and EQ, which is the creative piece, right? And they're not in
No
conflict
question.
with each other. They are actually completely together and meshed. And when you combine them, you get an amazing outcome.